I never imagined that an estate sale would change my life, but that's exactly what happened on that crisp autumn morning last October. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the neighborhood in warm hues of amber and gold as I pulled up to the old Victorian house on Maple Street. It stood there, proud yet somehow melancholic, its windows like tired eyes watching strangers pick through the remnants of someone else's life. I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and guilt as I walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Excitement for potential treasures, guilt for the voyeuristic nature of sifting through a stranger's possessions. I should mention that I've always been drawn to objects with history. There's something about holding an item that's witnessed decades of human life, the silent observer of countless conversations, arguments, celebrations, and quiet moments. Each scratch and wear mark tells a story, if only we take the time to listen. That's why I prefer estate sales to antique shops. The items haven't been curated or polished to perfection. They're honest in their imperfections. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent greeted me, that peculiar blend of old books, wood polish, and the lingering ghost of someone's perfume. The house was already buzzing with early birds, serious collectors who arrived at dawn with their measuring tapes and flashlights. I nodded to a few familiar faces from the local antiquing circuit as I made my way through the crowded living room. That's when I first saw him, examining a collection of vintage cameras with such careful attention that I couldn't help but watch. His fingers moved delicately over the metal casings, adjusting dials with reverence. He wore a faded denim jacket with patches on the elbows, his dark curly hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times that morning. When he looked up and caught me staring, he smiled, not the awkward smile of strangers caught in an uncomfortable moment, but something warmer, as if we shared a secret. "The Leica M3, he said, holding up one of the cameras. "Probably from the late 1950s. Still works perfectly." His voice had a melodic quality to it, soft yet clear enough to cut through the murmur of the crowd. I moved closer, drawn not just to the camera, but to his evident passion. "You know your cameras," I replied, immediately wishing I'd said something more clever. "I know beautiful things with stories," he countered, and I felt the first flutter of something I hadn't felt in years. His name was Daniel, I soon learned. He was new to town, having moved here just 3 weeks ago to take a position teaching art history at the local college. We discovered our shared appreciation for objects with character as we moved through the rooms together, a spontaneous partnership formed in our mutual delight at each new find. He pointed out details I might have missed, the hand-carved joinery on a bookshelf, the unique glaze technique on a ceramic vase. I showed him how to check for authentic dovetail joints and identify real silver from plate. The morning unfolded like a conversation between old friends, comfortable silences punctuated by excited discoveries. We found ourselves in the master bedroom, where several furniture pieces commanded attention. Among them stood a magnificent walnut dresser, its surface rich with patina that only comes from decades of hands opening and closing drawers, placing and removing items, living everyday life. "Look at this craftsmanship," Daniel whispered, running his hand along the curved front of the dresser. "Mid-century, I'd guess. Each drawer is perfectly balanced." He pulled one open to demonstrate, and indeed, it glided smoothly despite its age. I examined the piece more closely. The wood grain told its own story, darker in some places, lighter in others, with a depth that seemed almost liquid in the soft light filtering through the bedroom curtains. The brass handles had developed a beautiful verdigris in the crevices, while the frequently touched surfaces shone with the polish of regular use. "It's stunning," I agreed, already mentally rearranging my apartment to make room for it. But then I saw the price tag tucked discreetly on the inside of one drawer. My heart sank a little, though perhaps not meant to be mine. Daniel checked the price and winced sympathetically. "That's steep, even for something this beautiful." We debated the dresser's merits for several minutes. I measured the dimensions with my pocket tape measure while Daniel checked for structural integrity, both of us trying to justify the expense. In the end, practicality won out. My apartment was already overcrowded with previous finds, and the dresser was simply too large and too expensive to be practical. "Sometimes the hardest part of collecting is knowing when to walk away," I said, giving the dresser one last appreciative look before we moved on to other rooms. We spent nearly 3 hours at that estate sale, gradually filling our arms with smaller treasures, a set of Art Deco cocktail glasses for me, a collection of vintage photography books for Daniel, a brass letter opener we playfully fought over until deciding to let a coin toss determine its new owner. He won. By the time we reached the checkout table in the garage, we were chatting like old friends, our initial connection deepened by the shared experience of the hunt. As we paid for our items, the woman running the sale mentioned that they would be boxing up the unsold items for donation the following day. If there's anything you're on the fence about, tomorrow's your last chance, she said. Everything will be discounted. Daniel and I exchanged glances, both thinking about the dresser. Maybe we should come back tomorrow, he suggested, and I nodded, already looking forward to seeing him again. We exchanged phone numbers in the driveway, awkwardly balancing our purchases while typing into each other's phones. The promise of tomorrow hung between us as we said goodbye, something tentative yet expectant in the air. I spent that evening rearranging my apartment, finding places for my new treasures while thinking about Daniel. There was something refreshing about his enthusiasm, his ability to see beauty in objects others might overlook. I caught myself smiling at the memory of his animated explanation of why Bakelite jewelry deserved more appreciation, or how he could identify the decade of a piece of furniture by the style of its feet. The next morning, I arrived at the estate sale just as it opened. The crowd was much thinner, most of the prime items already claimed. Daniel was waiting by the front door, 2 coffee cups in hand. I took a guess. Black with 1 sugar, he said, offering me one of the cups. It was exactly how I took my coffee. How did you know? He shrugged, a playful smile on his lips. You strike me as someone who appreciates the full flavor but isn't afraid of a little sweetness. We entered the house, which felt different today, emptier, echoing slightly as we walked through rooms that had been crowded yesterday. Many items were gone, leaving behind dust outlines on shelves and walls. It felt more melancholy somehow, this second day, as if we were witnessing the final dissolution of someone's life. The dresser was still there in the bedroom, looking somehow more dignified in the increasingly bare room. The price had been reduced by 30%, making it more tempting but still a significant investment. We stood before it silently, both admiring its lines and presence. It really is beautiful, Daniel said finally. But I understand why it's practical to pass it up. I nodded, trying to be sensible. My apartment is already too full, and I'd need to hire movers to get it upstairs. And my place is still full of boxes I haven't unpacked, he added with a sigh. We reluctantly moved on, exploring the remaining items. In the basement, we discovered several boxes of miscellaneous items, the true leftovers of an estate sale. These were the objects deemed not valuable enough to display properly. Tangled costume jewelry, chipped teacups, faded photographs in damaged frames, instruction manuals for appliances long since discarded. There's something particularly poignant about these leftover boxes. They contain the most personal items, the ones that held meaning only to their owner. I found myself carefully sorting through one box, handling each object with respect. Daniel did the same beside me, occasionally holding something up for my inspection or comment. Look at this, he said softly, handing me a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were handwritten recipes, the ink faded but still legible. Notes in the margins recorded family reactions. John's favorite, too spicy for the children, perfect for Christmas morning. This feels too personal to sell, I whispered, turning the fragile pages carefully. It's like reading someone's diary. Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. These boxes are where you find the real story of a person's life. Not in the expensive furniture or collectibles, but in these small, everyday items. We spent over an hour going through those boxes, piecing together fragments of a stranger's life. We found birthday cards saved for decades, a child's handprint pressed in clay, dried corsages pressed between wax paper, ticket stubs from concerts and movies. Each item a memory, preserved long after its context had been forgotten. As we worked, Daniel told me about his own grandmother's passing 2 years ago, how he'd been the one to clean out her apartment because he was the only family member who lived nearby. There were so many things I didn't understand the significance of, he said, his voice soft with remembrance. Little trinkets she'd kept for 60 years that must have meant something important to her, but their stories died with her. I shared my own experience helping my parents downsize when they moved to their retirement community, the difficult decisions about what to keep and what to let go. My mother kept trying to give me things I had no room for, I explained. She couldn't bear the thought of her treasures going to strangers. Our conversation flowed naturally as we worked, moving from personal stories to broader thoughts about memory, legacy, and the objects we choose to surround ourselves with. There was an ease between us that felt rare and precious, a connection that deepened with each shared observation. Eventually, we made our way back upstairs, each carrying a small box of items we'd decided to rescue from donation. As we passed through the bedroom again, we both paused at the dresser, drawn to it like a magnetic force. We really should let it go, I said, not entirely convincing even to myself. Daniel ran his hand along the smooth top surface. Probably, he agreed, then added, but can I tell you something ridiculous? I keep imagining how perfect it would look in your apartment, by that bay window you described. I laughed, surprised that he'd been visualizing my space. I've been doing the same thing, thinking about how the morning light would hit the wood. He stepped closer to the dresser, his shoulder brushing mine. Maybe we're overthinking this. Sometimes you just have to follow your instincts about these things. I set my box down on the floor and opened each drawer of the dresser again, checking the smooth action of the runners, admiring the dovetailed joints visible at the corners. It is exceptional craftsmanship, I murmured, more to myself than to Daniel. Suddenly, he was behind me, his hands gently on my shoulders, turning me to face the dresser again. Close your eyes, he said softly. Now imagine waking up every morning and seeing this dresser in your room. How does that make you feel? I closed my eyes, letting the image form in my mind. I could see it clearly, the warm wood catching the first rays of sunlight, the brass handles gleaming, the solid presence it would bring to my somewhat chaotic space. It feels right, I admitted, opening my eyes to find Daniel watching me intently. Then maybe it's meant to be yours, he said, his voice low and close to my ear. I turned slightly, now standing between Daniel and the dresser. But it's still expensive, and I'd need help getting it home, and... He pressed me gently against the dresser, his body close but not intrusive. I have a truck, he said simply, and I'm stronger than I look. The moment hung between us, charged with something more than just discussion about furniture. I was acutely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from his body. The dresser's edge pressed against my back, solid and grounding. Why are you helping me? I asked, genuinely curious about his investment in my furniture decisions. His eyes met mine, serious now, because I felt something yesterday when we met. A connection I wasn't expecting, and I'm hoping that if I help you with this dresser, I might get to see where you put it. The honesty of his answer caught me off guard. In a world of dating apps and carefully calculated text messages, his directness was refreshing. That's very straightforward, I said, smiling despite my attempt to remain composed. Life's too short not to be, he replied, especially when you find someone who gets excited about the same strange things you do. I laughed at that, the tension breaking slightly. Antique hunting isn't that strange. No, but the way we both got emotional over a stranger's recipe book might be, he countered with a grin. He was right, of course. Our shared reverence for objects with history, our similar emotional responses to the personal items in those basement boxes, these weren't common connections. I felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and exhilarating. So what do you say? Daniel asked, stepping back slightly to give me space. Shall we rescue this dresser together? I took a deep breath, looking once more at the beautiful piece of furniture. Yes, I decided finally. Let's do it. The relief and joy on his face made me laugh again. You're really invested in this dresser, aren't you? I'm invested in seeing you again, he corrected gently. The dresser is just a bonus. We found the sale organizer and negotiated a final price for the dresser, managing to get an additional discount since it was the second day. As she wrote up the receipt, Daniel leaned close to whisper, "No regrets." I shook my head. No regrets. Loading the dresser onto Daniel's truck was an adventure in itself. The piece was heavier than it looked, solid hardwood that took both of us plus one of the estate sale workers to maneuver down the stairs and out to the driveway. By the time we had it secured in the truck bed, we were all sweating despite the cool autumn air. Still think it's worth it? Daniel teased as we climbed into the cab of his truck. Ask me again after we've carried it up to my third-floor apartment. I replied, only half joking. The drive to my place was filled with easy conversation. Daniel told me more about his move to town, his teaching position, his previous life in Chicago. I shared stories about my job as a librarian at the public library, my collection of vintage books, my failed attempts at learning to refinish furniture. By the time we arrived at my apartment building, it felt like we'd known each other for years rather than just over 24 hours. Getting the dresser up 3 flights of stairs was every bit as challenging as I'd anticipated. We had to take several breaks, laughing at our own ambition as we caught our breath on the landings. "This thing must be made of lead," Daniel groaned as we maneuvered around a tight corner. "Worth it, though," I insisted, though my arms were trembling with effort. When we finally pushed the dresser into position by my bay window, the transformation was immediate and undeniable. It was as if the piece had always been meant for that exact spot. The proportions perfect, the wood tone harmonizing with my other furniture in a way I couldn't have planned. "It's perfect," Daniel said, voicing my thoughts exactly. He stood back, admiring how the light played across the surface. "Absolutely perfect." We collapsed onto my sofa, exhausted but satisfied. I offered Daniel water, which he gratefully accepted, and we sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, recovering from our exertion. "Thank you," I said finally. "I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Happy to help, though I might not be able to move my arms tomorrow. I'll make it up to you," I promised. "Dinner, maybe? Once we can both lift forks again." His smile widened. "I'd like that very much." As the afternoon light filtered through my windows, casting long shadows across the floor and illuminating dust motes in the air, we sat together and admired the dresser, this beautiful object that had somehow brought us together. Daniel reached over and took my hand, his thumb gently stroking my palm. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've always believed that objects carry energy from their previous owners. If that's true, then this dresser has witnessed a lot of life. Morning routines, late-night conversations, quiet moments of reflection." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "And now it will witness our story, whatever that turns out to be." He squeezed my hand gently. "I'm looking forward to finding out." In the months that followed, that dresser became the anchor of many memories. Our first kiss happened leaning against it, after a dinner date 2 weeks later. The top drawer became the unofficial repository for things Daniel left at my place. A toothbrush, a favorite sweater, eventually a key to my apartment. When he finally moved in 6 months later, we rearranged the bedroom to give the dresser pride of place. Sometimes I think about the previous owner, the person whose life was distilled into an estate sale. I wonder if they could have imagined that their dresser would become the catalyst for a love story, that 2 strangers would connect over their appreciation of its craftsmanship and history. I like to think they would be pleased to know their possession found not just a new home, but helped create one. Estate sales are strange intersections of endings and beginnings. As we sift through the remnants of someone else's life, we sometimes find the seeds of our own future. That walnut dresser, which we decided not to buy and then couldn't resist, became more than just a piece of furniture. It became a symbol of our shared values, our willingness to see beauty in age and history, our commitment to preserving stories. And as for those boxed leftovers we sorted through in the basement, we did buy a few small items: that recipe book, a hand-carved wooden spoon, a small watercolor of mountains that now hangs in our hallway. These objects may have seemed insignificant to others at the estate sale, but to us, they represented the quiet dignity of everyday life, the beauty found in ordinary moments. Daniel and I still go to estate sales together, still get excited about dovetail joints and hand-forged hardware, still debate the merits and practicality of potential purchases. But now when we walk through those houses filled with someone else's history, we're also building our own, collecting not just objects, but shared experiences, inside jokes, and memories that will someday, perhaps, be represented by objects in our own home. That dresser stands as a daily reminder that sometimes the things we think we shouldn't buy, the connections we don't expect to make, the chances we almost don't take, these can become the most significant parts of our lives. Every morning when I open those smooth gliding drawers, I'm grateful that Daniel pressed me, both literally and figuratively, to reconsider what I truly wanted. In the end, it wasn't really about the dresser at all. It was about recognizing something valuable and having the courage to bring it home, to make space for it in our lives, to commit to caring for it. Whether that's a piece of furniture or a relationship, the principle remains the same. Some things are worth the effort, worth the investment, worth rearranging your life to accommodate. And as Daniel and I build our life together, surrounded by objects with histories both known and mysterious, I'm thankful every day for that estate sale, for those boxed leftovers we sorted through, and for the dresser we didn't buy until we did. Total _char_count 18,436.